Hey, I wanted to post some videos of things that were going on at the 400 this past trip down there. We spent 2 weeks down there with a film crew for a documentary, and unfortunately, most of everything that happened while we were there is going to be part of this documentary. So I'm not going to really be able to post much, but I would like to explain all the things that happened. And this is in the words of Shane because he wrote it all down. So I'm just actually going to have to read what Shane wrote. Uh, it was a crazy 10 days. Myself and Shane went in early to get camp prepared and get things going. It was fairly mellow at first for the first few days. A circumstance put us on three sets of tracks found together, 14-inch tracks, which we presume was the mother from the past, because it was almost 3 years ago that we had a copy of her tracks, which were 12 inches. So we're just assuming that she was a young mother, and she's still growing. So the 14-inch tracks, since they are accompanied by smaller tracks, we're assuming is still the same mother that's a part of this group. So the 14-inch tracks, presumably the mothers, 9.5-inch tracks. These would be unknown because the last tracks, which was 3 years ago, were, I think, 9.5 and 10.5. So there's no way either one of those would stay 9.5. The smaller one wouldn't stay 9.5. So there's a new one that's come along that's got 9.5-inch tracks, and then we found a 6-inch track. So now we think we are dealing with two new juveniles at two younger ages than the juveniles that we originally had out there with us, who clearly were getting close to being sub-adults at that time and have moved on to whatever the family dynamics are for younger adult creatures to move on. But clearly we're dealing with two new siblings. Apparently at the time when we were dealing with the other siblings, she had one on her torso, at least. Well, according to these tracks, the 6-inch would be a young one, but more than likely the 9.5-inch tracks belong to the ones that she had on her torso, depending on how quickly it was ready to hit the ground after we left from out there. Anyways, so those three sets of tracks have been found. So that's a new unknown so far. The evidence of juveniles we were casting in the previous years has not been found. Along with these tracks, we found brakes, fresh and old, a log with a baseball-sized rock sitting on top of it, creating a great knock when we hit it. And the 6.5-inch tracks led to a fresh dug hole with a stick still in it. So Shane hiked into the area, finding compression trails while getting knocks and clacks in front of him and back and forth by two individuals. While he would move forward 100 yards and stop, they would constantly stay 30 yards ahead of him, knocking back and forth. And he kept recording this as he was moving. Dan arrived. He's the biologist. He arrived at 10 p.m. and the night we hiked, casing back into the area that had been getting let in fairly quiet. Cynthia, the director and the audio expert, and Blair, camera and drone expert, arrived at 3:30 p.m. At 5:30 p.m., they go down to the trail from camp to relieve themselves. They cut between the trail and the creek, and Cynthia saw something black run down the creek bed through an opening in the trees. It was on all fours, no tail, bigger than a coyote, and when the sun hit it, the coat shined, had a sheen to it. So Dan went through the biologist went through all the possible known local animals with no certainty. Bear would probably be the only even possibility of a black-haired animal. We've never seen bear tracks out there. Never. I mean, never wild hog tracks. No bear tracks. Never had bear activity. So the likelihood that it's a bear is slim. So of course the Cynthia was perplexed, the producer. So Alex, the director and the camera guy, arrived at 11 p.m. I mean, he's not the camera guy, but he would man a camera every now and again, but he's mainly the director. And he arrived at 11 p.m. So we all went to the creek. Well, myself, Cynthia, Blair, and Dan went to the creek behind the campsite to launch my drone and fly ahead of Shane and Alex, who were walking on the trail, going down in that open area where we catch these creatures a lot. And so I was actually looking for hot spots, and we had headsets. Halfway down the trail, he and I lose communication because we were deep down in a creek with high sides. So there was a lot of debris between us that broke up our communication. So I could no longer hear him, and he couldn't hear me. So what I did was I just scanned ahead back and down the creek, and I was just scanning the whole field all the way down to the lake looking for hot spots. Even though I couldn't relay it to him, I was still looking. If I would have seen one, I probably would have ran from my location to tell him about it. But anyways, Alex, the producer, and Shane proceeded to their destination with only deer on thermal. So as they were heading back, they stopped 1/4 of the way to scan with the thermal and started to hear something fascinating. Samurai chatter. Just like the Sierra Sounds, the camera had been rolling nonstop since they left camp, so they captured almost 2 minutes. It was on the ridge, and we're about 30 to 40 yards from it on the trail. It was amazing. After it stopped, they went through the thicket towards it, reaching the base of the ridge, but could not locate a heat signature. Shane had a handheld unit. So we went to the conference the next couple of days later and played it in our presentation in front of Scott Nelson. He's a Navy cryptolinguist who determined that the Sierra Sounds were language and determined that it's Bigfoot vocalizations. So he said that since 1974, he has received hundreds of audio clips and none matching the Sierra Sounds until now. He believes that ours seems to be a match and is very excited. So he is going to do his studies with the raw file of the audio that Shane and the producer collected in their hike. And he is going to decipher it and put it down and transcript it and verify it and break down the phonetics. He's actually gotten 600 categorized transcripts, so those are certainly some interesting aspects of what we've uncovered out there. So the conference was a success. Film crew filmed the conference. We headed back to the 400 for 2 more days. And midday we find scat. That's where there's always been the story of the scat that seems to show up in places when Shane goes out there and parks his vehicle halfway down because he can only get it that far, and then hikes on down into the area to go through his normal hiking routine. Sometimes they'll leave scat by his vehicle, and it has pawpaw seeds in it. They've left scat on the trails. He has forged new trails, and often when he'd come back the way he went in, there would be fresh scat on the trails with pawpaw seeds in them. I'm not quite sure the significance, but the last day that we were there doing some filming, we're going down the trail, and right where they had went into the grass going up to the ridge is some scat with pawpaw seeds in it. So you gathered those up, with gloves on and a test kit, for possible DNA sampling. 3 different samples. One of them was taking one of the pawpaw seeds themselves, since they don't digest. So we know that it was floating around in the gastric juices, and so maybe that has the possibility of pulling some DNA of the host that was carrying it in its stomach. So we've got the seed in one of the samples, and then the fecal matter, and then some fecal matter from the center of one of the scats. So we're very excited about the possibilities. And then last night before 2 a.m., everyone was asleep, and we were planning on packing up the next day. So as Shane was dozing off, he heard a train or an air whistle. He didn't know if he was dreaming, so he laid there with his eyes wide open and heard it again from the same direction, not too far from camp. So he turned on his camera to try to catch it, and then nothing was heard again. Blair, the drone expert and the camera lady, wakes up at 2:35 hearing samurai chatter down the trail for a moment, and then it stopped. She fell back to sleep, and unfortunately we had no recorder going that last night, so those were missed. But all in all, it was a success on several fronts. Alex, Cynthia, and Blair are the perfect people to do this with us. They had a great time, showed no fears, stayed calm, and went where we went no matter the situation. I was very impressed. They will be filming our process over the next year and putting it into a docuseries format. I should also mention that we have improved our equipment, including a high-end ATN thermal monocular with a 4x40 lens and an Evo 2 drone thermal 6K camera. We have more coming to help improve our odds and better capture every possible moment. I'm sure we left some things out, but a big thanks to everyone: Alex, Dan Nedrolo, Gary, Shane, me, the producers, and certainly the camera and audio specialists that were out there. It was an amazing trip. This is about all I can give you. Unfortunately, it's not going to include any videos. Maybe I can post a picture or two of some of the tracks that were found this time around. But you can understand why we can't share some of the things that we share, because it's going to be on a documentary. But make sure you go back on Amazon and look at our very first documentary from 4 or 5 years ago when we went out to that property. It's called Into the 400. It's very amateur. We just did it with GoPros and the best we could, because we didn't know the degree of difficulty to trying to put a documentary together, so we just went through that process. So it's very amateur, but it'll show you the location, it'll show you what's going on out there, and with these